Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin Schall. Today, we are answering your questions, including whether or not the Knicks actually have a big three. Should they still consider trading for Karl Anthony Towns? And what exactly is going on in Julius Randle's mind? If I can answer that, you guys should start paying me for these. All that and more next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. And I want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And I wanted to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, because we are now available on all platforms. That's right. You can check us out on YouTube whenever your heart desires. And if you do that, be sure to hit the notifications bell to be sure you never miss an episode, and hit that subscribe button to doubly make sure, and do the same on your favorite podcast platform of choice. And if you want to take things a step further, if you really, this is kind of the engagement proposal of being a podcast listener, but you can subscribe to our Subtext. All you have to do is hit the link in the episode description, and you will get thoughts from Alex and I before and after every single Knicks game. And you can text us questions whenever you want, not just when we do a mailbag once a month. But who's talking to you? I'm Gavin Schall. I've been covering the NBA for a decade now, which is crazy to say. Part of it as a credentialed reporter, and I also do play-by-play broadcasting. I'm going to be doing some Long Island football today for those of you who live in those parts. But let's get into it. We are answering your questions. The first one today comes from our friend LC Hunt at LC Hunt 2 on Twitter. So go throw him a follow. And he wants to know, what constitutes a big three? Average in points, all-star appearances? What should the criteria be? So I spent a little bit of time thinking about it because I think typically the definition of a big three is maybe a little bit too generous. And we're very quick to throw out the big three designation without really having players that have earned it. And it feels like anytime a team trades for a guy who's a former all-star, it's all right. We got a big three. We got a big three now. We have our big three. But I don't think that's actually how I would define it. Here's my quick list of criteria. I think all three guys have had to make an all-star team in the somewhat recent past. Let's just say within the last 3 seasons, or still like roughly be playing at that level. There are exceptions to this. Like I obviously it never really happened because Golden State sort of had their big three in Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, and Steph Curry in their original iteration. But someone like Andre Iguodala, who is not a perennial all-star, but that being more so due to the role he played on his team versus his talent level, and as he showed by winning a Finals MVP, he was certainly deserving of all-star status and probably at his peak should have been considered one of the best 24 players in the NBA. That's kind of an interesting debate, whether or not you would put him there. But someone like that, I think, could be an exception to the rule. So that's not a hard and fast rule, but I would say generally they would have needed to have been an all-star within the last 3 seasons or so, or still be playing at what most people would consider an all-star above level. Someone like Emmanuel Ginobili would be another great exception to that rule, because obviously the Spurs were a big three for a very long time, and he was someone who's a future Hall of Famer. Without, I think, at any point in his career, maybe he made one, making an all-star team. So that would be the exception, like someone who's a Hall of Famer who plays a very specific role on a team, doesn't really put up numbers, and misses all-star berths because of that. But you have 3 players of about that caliber that could be considered, I don't know, in any given year, one of the top 30 best players on planet Earth. And then I think it's a measure of who your best player is at the end of the day, right? Your number one guy has to be someone, and I parse this kind of back and forth. It has to be someone who can get your team to an NBA conference finals. Like you have to be the best player on one of the 4 best teams in the league. And if you think the ceiling of your number one guy is lower than that, I'm just reticent to throw big three out there, right? Because here's a great recent example for me. The Chicago Bulls, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, right? 3 good players. All of them, at least at the beginning of their Bulls tenure, hit that all-star criteria. Heck, I mean, there could have been a year out there where they all made an all-star team. And maybe if Lonzo Ball stayed healthy, I would push back on myself here and say, you know what? The best version of that team maybe could have made a conference finals. The best version of DeMar DeRozan could have been the best player on a conference finals team, but they never quite got there. They never even got out of the first round with that group. So I don't think you can call them a big three. And I think there were questions about whether DeRozan was quite good enough to be the number one guy on a team that made the conference finals. I guess did he in Toronto? And so maybe I'm contradicting myself a little, but you get my point. That would not be a big three just because all three guys were all-stars. I think the best player has to carry his own weight. And like another way of defining it would be like the number one guy should be borderline top 10 dude in the league. And I don't think you could have said that about DeRozan. All right, so how does this all apply to the current Knicks? Let's start with the best player designation, Jalen Brunson. So last season, he proved to be the clear-cut best player on a team that came within a game and maybe 2 more shots in a game 6 of making a conference final. So he's pretty darn close to hitting that top player mark of a big three, but didn't quite get there. And if anything, this year, unfortunately, we talked a little bit about it in our last game recap, he's probably a bit worse this year than he was last year. I mean, he clearly is worse as in the paint finisher this season, whether you want to talk about his distribution. That's kind of an open question. His 3-point shooting has been better this year. His defense has been better this year, but overall, not quite the same guy he was last year. Now, we're only 12 games into the season. Could that course correct relatively quickly? Yeah. And I could see Jalen Brunson at his absolute apex, just kind of scraping over the mark to be the clear-cut number one guy on a team that could make the conference finals. So I think he's a good candidate. Julius Randle, the version of Julius Randle the Knicks got last year, I would say, at least to be clear, I'm talking about the regular season version of Julius Randle, pretty clear-cut example of a very solid number 2 guy in a big three. Obviously, there are higher-end big threes. You look at the Miami Heat, right? And you have Dwayne Wade in that spot, and he is absolutely overqualified to be the number 2 in a big three. You could say the same thing about the Warriors, whether it was you're putting Steph Curry or Kevin Durant at those spot. We're talking about 2 of the top 15 or so players of all time. Both those guys absolutely overqualified to be the number 2 guy in a big three. But Julius Randle and kind of what's your normal run-of-the-mill big three, he's like pretty solid as a number 2, someone like that version of him, an all-NBA player. Like that's all you can ask for. It's a top 15 guy in the league by definition. I would consider that a very solid number 2 in a big three. Now, again, if the Knicks want to solidify their status of having a big three, ideally Julius Randle would roughly translate his regular season of play to the playoffs. And if there's a small fall off there, that's okay. That's pretty normal for everyone in the NBA. But I'm talking about him having 95% of his regular season production in the playoffs versus about 30%. Obviously, the way he started this year would absolutely tank any conversation of the Knicks having a big three. The way he's been playing the last 5 games or so, totally worthy of being the number 2 guy in a big three. All right, so who is the third for the New York Knicks? So the running joke about the mid three, I think in the past, and specifically last year, was more of a reflection of RJ Barrett than either of those 2 guys, because he was not your typical third guy in a big three. Like you could look at Chris Bosh. You could look at, again, if you want to reference those Warriors teams, whether you want to throw Iguodala, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green in that spot. Like RJ is just a dramatic far cry from the ability of those guys, not in the same stratosphere. In the past, this season, he is still not quite up to those levels, but we're talking about historic big threes at those levels, right? You could reference the original, the 70s Lakers, when Elgin Baylor was the third banana. Again, surefire Hall of Famer, surefire top 12 to 15 guy of all time. You could even get a little bit more modern with the 80s Lakers. I feel gross about how often I'm saying the Lakers here, but James Worthy, right? Big game James. I'm someone capable of winning a finals MVP. Again, just well above and beyond anything RJ's accomplished in his NBA career so far. That being said, the way that RJ has been playing this year so far, I don't think it's totally crazy to say he's playing at the level of what you kind of consider a standard big three in the NBA. Their third best player, like 22, 5 and 4, ultra efficient. That is everything you can ask for. Like, let's look at the Bucks, right? Let's look at what Chris Middleton did for them. Where if Giannis was the clear-cut number one guy, I would say Drew Holiday was probably the number two guy in that championship team, just given how defining he was in terms of their defensive identity. But there was some ambiguity there because Chris Middleton was sort of their big shot maker. And RJ, there's a world. I mean, I think at the end of the day, that's probably going to be Jalen Brunson. But there's a world for a series where he could be that guy. And he could play at a Chris Middleton-esque level. What he's been doing so far this year is at a Chris Middleton-esque level. Do I expect him to continue that throughout the rest of the season? That's a very open question. He's certainly not going to shoot 50% from three for the rest of the season. But I say all that to say there's a world where RJ Barrett is kind of that guy. Like we could go through the rest of the league real quick to see just how many other big threes there are. It isn't really as common in the modern NBA as you would think. The Celtics, they have a big four, right? All four of their top guys qualify for those marks. And Derek White isn't all that far off. The Sixers, more of a big two. The Heat, a big two. Though Tyler Hero, actually, you could, if he plays how he's played in the early part of the season, you could say the Heat have a big three. The Pacers, no. The Bucks, they need Chris Middleton to get healthy. The Hawks, no. The Magic, no. Nets, no. Cavs, yeah, kind of. They toe the line. I think it will be interesting to see what Darius Garland can do over the course of another full season there with Donovan Mitchell. Hasn't been a great start for him, though. Of course, there's some injuries. Raptors, no. Bulls, we just talked about. Hornets, no. Wizards, no. Pistons, no. In the Western Conference, the Nuggets, yeah, I think Aaron Gordon is an interesting test case, and that would be a whole nother podcast. But I would say just on the strength of Jokic and Murray, you could call that a big three. The Mavericks, no. The Timberwolves, yeah, tentatively Towns needs to shoot a little bit better, but I would say, yeah, they do have a big three. OKC, not yet, but they will. Rockets, not yet, but they probably will. Kings, no. Lakers, no. Need a little bit more from Reeves. Warriors, no, they have a big one right now. The Suns, yep, obviously, if they were actually healthy, they have a hypothetical big three. The Pelicans, sort of, yeah, if those guys are healthy. We haven't seen it yet. Jazz, no. Clippers, Spurs, no. Blazers, no. Grizzlies, not really. So you see, it's like maybe they're 5 or 6 in the NBA right now. You could push it out to 7. It's not that common, but the Knicks, I actually think, are probably closer to that designation than some people might think, which is pretty cool because it's not something that I would have thought of in the past in regard to the Knicks. All right, we are going to come back and we are going to talk Karl Anthony Towns because I think it's once again become a worthy question to talk about that as a potential trade. We'll get into why in just a sec here on Locked On Knicks. But before we do that, I want to tell you about our good friends over at Betterhelp. And a reminder that this show is sponsored by Betterhelp. This time of year, the holiday season, I know it's generally very tough for me. And I think it's tough for people all over the country because you're inevitably spending a lot more time around your family. And that brings up some old feelings, some old insecurities, some old struggles that you once had. And a lot of times it's difficult to remind your body that, hey, I'm not 5, 10, 12 years old anymore, and I'm an adult, and those issues that you maybe have with your family as a kid aren't issues anymore, and your body doesn't really realize that. But to get to that point, therapy can be a significant help. It's a bright spot amid all the stress and change, something to look forward to, make you feel grounded, and give you the tools to manage everything that is going on. Personally, I have benefited immensely from therapy. And I think I've talked about this on the show in the past, but the greatest thing it's given me is increased self-awareness and the ability when I start ruminating to just kind of pinpoint and say, all right, this is a rumination. Your thoughts are just your thoughts, and you can work with them and you can work with your emotions, not against them, and feel a lot better. So if you're thinking about therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. You can find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And that's not the only thing we wanted to mention with today's show, because today's show is also brought to you by our good buddies over at Gametime. Gametime has absolutely changed my life as a ticket buyer, because you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to a big event. Whether it's sports, music, comedy, or theater events, Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy all your tickets. They let you see the view ahead of time. One of my single favorite features, they have all-in prices, so you see the total up front. I am so tired of buying tickets to an event, thinking I found a steal, and then getting to check out, and then it's like, wait, here are your service fees, and it's $30, and then all of a sudden, it's not so good of a deal anymore. They let you buy tickets in just 2 seconds, or buy tickets in not just 2 seconds, in seconds with 2 taps. It depends on how fast you tap at the end of the day. You can find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals for football, basketball, baseball, and concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price if you find tickets in the same section row for less. Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, and it is guaranteed. Alrighty, let's continue talking some Karl Anthony Towns here on Locked On Knicks. I know, a controversial topic. But our guy, Lakaj, he says, "Hi guys, not a Cat fan, but can't deny that he is a great fit on a starting lineup in a desperate need of scoring and shooting, especially from the 4 spot. Hate his contract. Randle and Fournier for Cat and salary works. Don't see the Knicks giving up more than a first in that. Thoughts?" All right, let's talk this through. So asked this question about 4 days ago before Julius Randle had his best game of the season. So I guess it comes down to how much that changes your perspective on things. Alex and I talked this out a bunch over the offseason. We've talked this out so many more times than I can count on this podcast over the last few years. So I think it might be a relief, like when the trade finally happens, because then we won't have to talk about it as a hypothetical anymore. But in the past, we've said, especially when he's playing well, that Julius Randle is probably roughly as good as Karl Anthony Towns on the right night in the right context. He is a better player than Karl Anthony Towns. He's certainly a better distributor. He certainly has a higher ceiling defensively. Is it worth the extra spacing? On paper, I would say it is, because Karl Anthony Towns, at the end of the day, self-designated best big man shooter ever, is a 39% 3-point shooter on high volume for his career. Julius Randle is a 33% 3-point shooter for his career on relatively middling volume, at least until last year, when he was up there in terms of 3-point attempts amongst bigs in the entire NBA, was up there actually, period, amongst 3-point attempts throughout all players in the NBA. But I do think Towns would go a long way to changing the Knicks spacing. Here's my biggest issue with it. In the past, Towns obviously played a lot of center. He's had to change that since the Timberwolves went out and got Rudy Gobert. As a power forward last year, his shooting suffered a bit, and their offense really suffered when him and Gobert were on the floor. They were actually one of the worst offenses in the league with those two out there, which is different because when Towns would play the 5 in the past, the Timberwolves would consistently put up some of the best offensive numbers in all of basketball. This season, their offensive numbers are actually quite a bit better. They're much closer to league average. Their starting lineups are amazing on the whole, mostly because they put up some of the best. They flat out do have the best defense in the NBA right now. They play some of the best defense in the league when those two are out there together. So that's a flip from everything we've seen in the past from Towns. But the offense has not quite been as good. And this year, Towns is shooting just terribly so far. As bad as Julius Randle is, Karl Anthony Towns is not all that far off in terms of how he shot the basketball this season. Now, we have how many years into the league is he? 7-8 year sample size of Karl Anthony Towns being an amazing shooter. So in all likelihood, he probably is that. But clearly something about playing the 4 versus playing the 5 is affecting his ability to score efficiently. And that something is probably the giant French guy standing at the rim. Will it make any difference if it's the giant Louisiana guy standing at the rim in Mitchell Robinson? I don't really think so. So I do think Towns undoubtedly would be a boon to the Knicks offense. It would give all that much more space to Jalen Brunson to operate. It would give a lot more space for RJ Barrett to operate. I think you'd be getting cleaner lobs. And when you want to do it, entry passes to Mitchell Robinson, Quinn Grimes would probably get more shots out of swing sequences. When you play the bench in there with some of those guys, it would make life a lot easier on them. But there's going to be Possibly a defensive drop-off, possibly not. I can't say I've watched a lot of the Timberwolves, but again, all the statistical indicators are that Towns has become a substantially better defender, or is just really good playing off of an elite rim protector, which you would also have in New York. So that would be exciting. Here's where it breaks apart for me at the end of the day, just the money that Towns is going to make. We can take a look at both those guys' contract. For Julius Randle, the next few years, he is making this season $28 million. Next season, he's making a bit over $30 million if he hits his likely incidentals. And then he's a player option in 2025-26 for around $32 million that if he plays well, he will most likely reject that player option, sign a new contract, but that money will still most likely be a lot less than Karl Anthony Towns, who makes $36 million this year, and then a 4-year extension kicks in where he's making $49 million, and then $53 million, and then $57 million, and then a 2028, player option where he is making $61 million. And now I think Towns is still going to be an awesome player at that point. He'll only be 31 years old. Again, his game is not really based on athleticism. He should project to age better than other bigs, maybe even a little bit better than Julius Randle will age. But at the end of the day, I don't think that money is worth it. I don't think the orange is worth the squeeze. I think Towns, there's a world where he makes you a better team. I don't see him making you so much better, especially given the fact that, like Julius, not quite to the same extent, but like Julius, he's consistently a playoff underperformer. I don't really feel the urge to go out and lock in my future cap space into Karl Anthony Towns, especially when the Knicks have dreams of finding a greater star. And I think someone like Donovan Mitchell, despite it being maybe more tricky from a positional perspective and a worse fit with someone like Jalen Brunson, I think I would still rather have a Donovan Mitchell, as I mentioned. I think we talked about, I can't remember with who, but we talked about that on a previous podcast on here. All right, a few more questions to go. One about Mitchell Robinson, and then a few deep dives on Julius Randle's psyche and some New York sightseeing plans. But before we get to all that, I wanted to tell you guys about our buddies over at PrizePicks. So the question you might be asking yourself when I say that word, what is PrizePicks? PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports DFS platform in North America, with the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections. And then from there, you watch the winnings roll in. With basketball season finally here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For this example, I want to use someone on the Giants, but no one on the Giants offensively will ever record a positive statistic, so I am forced to go to the hated Jets. Garrett Wilson receptions plus Julius Randle 3-pointers. Let's throw an over under 8.5 on that. And I would probably take the over because Julius is playing better. He's shooting the 3 with confidence. And maybe even more importantly, Garrett Wilson. They don't have a lot of other people to throw to. And Zach Wilson likes throwing to him a whole lot. Want to play alongside of some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz. You can now find community plays under the promo tabs of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each and every week. PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured for football and basketball games. If you have a player exits the game in the first half and does not return the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. And that is maybe my single favorite thing about PrizePicks. I am someone who loves college football, loves putting some money down on college football. And it is painful when I think everything through correctly and I have a great plan in place and it's about to happen and then it gets screwed up because one of my guys gets hurt. So with PrizePicks, that is not a fear. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, guys, let's go rapid fire through a couple final questions here. First one comes from Clyde Frazier fan account at Frazier. Incredible handle. Is there a team that becomes instant championship contenders with the addition of Mitchell Robinson? Let's do this live. Let's roll through. The Boston Celtics, they're already there. the Philadelphia 76ers? No, though it would certainly help them, as they always get killed in non-Joel Embiid minutes. So imagine playing Mitchell Robinson for 12 minutes a game. He'd probably get 12 offensive rebounds. So he would help them, but I would say they're already in that conversation, don't really need him. The Heat, again, don't really need him, but sure, he would help them. Maybe he would push them up there. The Indiana Pacers, they already have Miles Turner, so not really a need there. Brook Lopez is in Milwaukee, so not really a need there. Atlanta already has Clint Capella, not really a need there. Orlando has Wendell Carter. I think you could argue they'd be Mitchell Robinson's a better player. I think Wendell Carter is a better fit for the Magic because they have no shooting across their 1 through 4. So they desperately need a 5 who can stretch the floor, which Wendell Carter can a bit. Mitchell Robinson obviously cannot. That would go probably right up to the best defense in basketball and right up to the worst offense in basketball. So if you are just a masochist or if you really miss the early 2000s, I guess that would be a fun fit. The Brooklyn Nets, they would be better with Mitchell Robinson, not title contenders. The Cleveland Cavaliers, that's actually like a good one. That might be what Frazier is targeting here, because I do think on the defensive end, he is a pretty significant upgrade over Jared Allen. The combo of him and Evan Mobley together is probably more than enough to make up for Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell being your starting backcourt. I think they would be a better team with Mitchell Robinson, but I also think Jared Allen's a good player, and they lose something offensively trading Mitch for Jared Allen. So I don't think it's quite enough of an upgrade to call them title was the question, title contenders or title instant championship contenders. I think that's probably a little bit too rich for me, but there's a world where that pushes them to being championship contenders. Charlotte, no. Washington, no. Detroit, no. Denver, no need for him, though. Again, those backup minutes, that would make him even more of a championship contender. The Dallas Mavericks, right there with the Cavs for the best answer to this question. This is bold, but I'm going to say yes, because the biggest thing they're missing on that team is defense. And Mitch, as we've seen, is pretty much a self-made top 10 defense in basketball. We'll see if he can keep that up the whole year. And I do think the Knicks 1 through 4 are probably slightly better defenders than the Mavericks 1 through 4, but it is in such a substantial difference that I don't think Mitchell Robinson can push them towards that territory. And if you have enough defense and you have Luka Doncic and you have whatever you want to say about him off the court, Kyrie Irving riding his coattails, like that is enough to be a championship contender. So I would say the Dallas Mavericks are the answer to this question. And I would also throw out there that Mitch running pick and roll with Luka Doncic with a spread court, it would be like sending my man to heaven. Like he would be averaging an efficient 14 points per game, just diving and dunking all game long, and teams would have issues with it. That would be scary. I'm glad that's not the case. Minnesota don't need him. OKC is another good one, man. Like him playing next to Chet and Chet spacing the floor. The only issue with that is their offense is so good right now because they're playing 5 out, and you would lose that with Mitch, but it would be a really interesting curveball for them. I wouldn't say championship contender, but they'd be better with Mitchell Robinson. Houston, weird fit with him and Şengün. Sacramento, that's a pretty good answer. Again, like a lot of the magic of their team is playing Sabonis at the 5 and playing small ball. In the playoffs, it would be a good pivot for them, but they would lose some essential piece of their offense there. So interesting, but probably not the case. The Lakers, that would kind of replicate what they had with AD and Dwight. That would be really cool. I'm going to say yes on the Lakers. I think Mitchell Robinson, they're just so bad this year when LeBron's off the court. I don't know. I have a little bit of trouble getting there, but they would be a lot more dangerous, and they would have kind of a puncher's chance at a title with Mitchell Robinson. Like him, AD, LeBron is just so much size, and I think they would set defensive records. They would smother people on that end of the floor, and they would have some answers to Nikola Jokic, which would be pretty cool to see. Golden State, I kind of want to say yes. Like he's a substantial upgrade over Kevon Looney defensively, as game as Looney is. Him and Draymond defending together would be awesome, but it would just kind of further emphasize that they have no offense outside of Steph Curry. So probably no at the end of the day, but close. The Suns, I think, tied for the best answer with the Dallas Mavericks. They would be absolutely potent with, like, if you just throw Mitchell Robinson on that team, they go from a team that I think is going to go out earlier than people think in the playoffs, that I don't really think is for real, to like a true blue championship favorite right there with the Nuggets and the Celtics. Like that would change everything for them. Shame they took DeAndre Ayton over him. Was that the same draft? I think Mitch was maybe a year earlier, Wow. Isn't that crazy that you'd rather have Mitchell Robinson than DeAndre Ayton? First pick, 35th pick. All right. Anyway, small victory lap for me. Pelicans, maybe long shot. And the Clippers would be a distant long shot, and then no one else in the Western Conference. But that was a great question. All right. Let's finish with two ones that are kind of long, but I'm going to answer them pretty quickly. Adrian Chatham. Adrian, I hope I'm getting your name right, given that we've met in person at the Batman movie. That was a lot of fun. You can follow him on Twitter. Please follow him because Adrian is a fantastically nice guy at MagicAge683. And he said, howdy. I listened to this episode. This was the episode where he just went in on Julius Randle. And I have a thought. After a good season, it seems like he puts added pressure on himself because of what comes with it. After that first All-Star year, everyone was looking at him as a leader, and he was starting to get more endorsements and attention. I think he might be pressing because he feels added weight. This year, he has the Skechers deal and also was an All-Star. And I think when he's not doing well, he starts to ruminate about his responsibilities and people relying on him. I know it's conjecture, and we're not psychologists, but I know that mindset of putting too much on your own plate when you can't handle it, and then you see it leak out in unproductive ways. Being a jerk to your teammates is definitely something that he does. I have seen it up close, him rolling his eyes and being ornery when they haven't done things, at least on the outside, to warrant it. It's just in his mind. He probably thinks he's being forthright and clear, but that may not be the case. Either way, hope he cleans this up and at least keeps his cool, winning, losing, or otherwise. He started to clean it up. This was about 4 or 5 games ago with the nadir of the Julius Randle experience this year. But man, Adrian, I kind of want you to get on our Betterhelp reads because it seems like you have a great understanding of the human mind and what healthy psychology looks like. I'm totally in agreement with you. I think he does put too much pressure on himself after he has a good season, and he's trying to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. And look, he did it for a year during the COVID year. That was the thing. I think that helped reinforce that mindset because he was the sun, the moon, the stars. He was everything to that 2021 team. Tried to do it next year. It just wasn't sustainable because he's just not that guy to single-handedly carry a team like that. And to be fair, there's maybe, I don't know, 5 to 8 guys in the league who could have carried a team like the 21-22 Knicks, right? Like the roster just wasn't great. Even the year before, the roster really was not great. Almost zero offensive help. He did his best with it, and it was awesome. He did a really, really good job. And I think that same pressure like might have snuck its way in, and it totally makes sense that he would lash out when he feels that weight. He's not living up to it, and he just feels frustrated, and he does not want to take the blame for it. That maybe goes back to some childhood stuff, but I also feel to some extent, I've said this before on this podcast, in some ways it is very unfair of me to say that because I don't know Julius Randle, I don't know his life, and I am not a psychologist. So even though that explanation would line up at the end of the day, and it's totally plausible that is the case. Again, I think it is somewhat an unfair thing to speculate on. All right, let's wrap up with this really nice email from our friend Victor Miguel. And he wanted to tell us, I'm born in Chile, but I live in Perth in Western Australia. So he's an Aussie now. And he said he loves the podcast, loves listening to it, tells his friends about it, and listens to it on his commute. And as I've said it a million times on the show, but I'll say it to you personally, Victor, I'm always really touched. And it literally makes my whole week when we hear someone listens overseas and listens consistently. That is the coolest thing in the world to think someone on the other side of the world is checking out what we have to say about the Knicks. So first of all, just thank you, Victor. I really, really appreciate it. These 3 different questions or comments. Tom Thibodeau is using Julius in the same way Van Gundy used Larry Johnson, my favorite Knick ever, in the late 90s when we got to the finals in the last healthy days of Patrick, getting the double team and moving the ball to Houston and Spree. Some of the ball movement that Julius is doing is very similar to what LJ did back in the day. I'd appreciate your comments. I can't comment on it directly because I did not get a chance to watch the 90s Knicks live as I was born in 1995. So I mostly missed that era. My first team, I've said it before on this pod, was kind of the 2003 team. Shout out Majik Lamp. I think, was that how you said his name? And Mike Sweetney, Kurt Thomas, Stephon Marbury, my first favorite Knick. Latrell Sprewell, my first ever Knick jersey. So all those guys, big fans of them all. But the 90s was a little bit before my era, but I can see it. And I think the setup is honestly kind of like the 90s Knicks in terms of how they use their wings and how the wings are sort of shooters, but not really. And the floor is kind of cramped around Mitchell Robinson, and he's dominating the game on offensive rebounding instead of how Patrick dominated the game, which was on post-ups and short little turnarounds. But they are kind of similar structurally. And Larry Johnson was very much ahead of his time as kind of like an athletic, like a little bit of a stretchy 4. So I think it's a good comp. He also said, I'm traveling to New York in 2 weeks. He asked this question 2 weeks ago. So he's now in New York, or at least on the Eastern Seaboard. And he said, I'm going to see Knicks Heat. So that's in a couple days. I'll also be in Washington to watch Knicks versus Wizards. That game is tonight. So that's pretty cool. But also, I'd like to visit some historic basketball places in New York besides MSG. Please, would you recommend to me some historic places from a basketball point of view in New York City? I know that I'd like to visit Rockefeller Park, but any places in New York where legends are born. I think he said maybe where Gavin balls with his mates as he lives near MSG. I think he probably meant Rucker Park there, though. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Victor, when you listen to the episode. But yeah, Rucker Park certainly qualifies. The Cage on West 4th Street is a legendary court. If you want to go watch some quality pickup, a lot of my friends went to NYU, so I was always in that area around college, and I always stopped and inevitably start watching basketball for about 10, 15, 20 minutes. It's not really as like legendary, but I really enjoy the courts in Central Park. They're around 86th Street, right in the middle of the park. Can't really miss them, just on top of the Great Lawn. And then the courts in Battery Park. That was the area I went to high school. So near and dear to my heart. Great place to play. Great place to watch in basketball. Also, non-basketball recommendation, but certainly you should check out the High Line. You should walk around Central Park. Plenty of great spots. Let me know if you want some more. And he said, I think Gavin is tricking us and actually has 3 jobs: host, broadcaster, and working in the emergency department because the ambulances are always near him. It's good given how some of the Knicks games have ended of late. I might need one at the end of the day, especially if Julius Randle goes into another spiral. But it's just where I live. There are a lot of them there. I think there's a hospital like 10 blocks away. But anyways, thank you so much for answering the questions, Victor, or for asking the questions, Victor. And thank you to all of you who asked some questions and participated. That's it for this live episode of Locked On Knicks, but we will talk to you very, very soon on the Locked On Knicks podcast.